Boker Tov to everybody. We're entering Shabbat with Shavuot, and we have a very interesting Torah of Parashat Naso, the longest parasha of the Torah, discussing the Nazir as well as other topics, and we have the Haftarah with Shimshon, the birth of Shimshon, which is very, very interesting. So I'll put it here. And I'll speak Ezrat Hashem on Shabbat morning after the Kiddush. I'll give a short speech about it in Hebrew for those who speak Hebrew. But I won't say the same thing because otherwise it's chaval for you now to waste your time. So we'll do. I'll start from the end now, and I'll say the beginning Ezrat Hashem on Shabbat. So let's start with this famous perek. I'll read it very, very fast because you know it, and then we'll discuss what's interesting in the perek. ויוסיפו בני ישראל, you see it, right? On the computer, yeah? לעשות הרע בעיני השם, ויתנם השם ביד פלישתים 40 שנה. So שופטים פרק י"ג starts with like every chapter in Shoftim with a different nation that makes problems to Am Yisrael. Now it's a time of Plishtim, and it will long because the Kotov will discuss at length Plishtim. Okay. ויהי איש אחד מצורעה ממשפחת הדני ושמו מנוח ואשתו עקרה ולא ילדה. So who are we talking now? We're talking about a person called Manoach and his wife, who has no name because she's Eshet Manoach, Akara velo Yalada. Okay, she cannot give birth. וירא מלאך השם אל האישה, ויאמר אליה, הנה את עקרה ולא ילדת, והרית וילדת בן, ואתה אישה אמרינה, ואל תשתי יין ושכר, ואל תאכלי כל טמא, כי נח הרע ויולדת בן, ומורה לא יעלה על ראשו, meaning to say that you cannot use a knife to cut his hair, כי נזיר אלוהים יהיה הנער מן הבטן, והוא יחל להושיע את ישראל מיד פלישתים. So she is been given a prophecy, נבואה, that her, in her womb, she has a baby, kadosh מבטן, nazir, and that's a kesher apparently to the parasha, it's clear. And then she has to take care of several isurim. Yes, she cannot drink all that is related with grapes, and she cannot eat tameh. And it's not mamash the same isurim as we know, because we know 3 isurim of tum'ah, of shtiyat yain, and tisporet, and here al tochli kol temeh. What does it mean? Not very clear. And we know that from the Mishnayos in Nazir that Nazir היה Shimshon. The Mishnah says explicitly that Shimshon was a Nazir, but he was a different Nazir. Okay. He nachara, but he killed a lot of Plishtim. How is it possible? אסור לו להתאמן. So the Gemara discusses it. Okay. כי נח והרע ויולדת בן, ומורה לא יעלה על ראשו. כי נזיר אלוהים יהיה הנער מן הבטן, והוא יחל להושיע את ישראל, he'll be the leader to take עם ישראל out of the galus of פלישתים. ותבוא האישה. Who is she? Nobody, no name. מנוח's wife. ותאמר לאישה לאמור, איש האלוהים בא אליי ומראהו כמלאך אלוקים. She understands immediately that it's a malach, okay, it's איש האלוקים, she knows who she was talking with. ולא שהלתיעו מזהו ואת שמו לא הגיד לי, ויאמר לי נחרה וילדת בן, ואתה אל תשתי יין ותאכלי כל טומאה, כי נזיר אלוהים יהיה מן הנער מן הבטן עד יום מותו. She tells him almost exactly what she was told. She doesn't talk about מספריים, about מורה לא יעלה על ראשו, but okay, she forgets, or maybe she says, and the Kotov doesn't write it, whatever. ויעתר מנוח אל השם ויאמר, בי השם, איש האלוקים אשר שלחת, יבוא נא עוד אלינו ויורנו מה נעשה ליער היולד. But just a minute, your wife just told you explicitly מה נעשה לנער היולד, okay? She told you in detail, exactly. No, not exactly, okay? But I'm not sure that he felt that she missed something, okay? מה זה איש האלוקים אשר שלחת יבוא נא עוד אלינו? So I don't want to get into it, but you can see from here that he feels like the big person at home. Okay, he's the choshev person at home. Everything has to go through him. Okay, you have talked with my wife, it's not enough for me. Talk to me, I am the boss. And then he comes, וישמע אלוקים בקול מנוח, ויבוא מלאך אל האישה, והיא יושבת בשדה, ותמהר האישה, ותרוץ ותגד לאישה, so she gets up and runs and tells her husband and tells him, הנה נראה אליי האיש אשר בא ויום אליי. The man, the angel who have come before, he is now talking to you. ויקום וילך מנוח אחרי אשתו. And that's very cynical, because in Chazal, from this pasuk, everybody knows the drasha, וילך מנוח אחרי אשתו, מכאן שהיה עם הארץ. Okay? Because he went after his wife. But it's very, very funny, because in this perek, and I'll read it Bezrat Hashem on Shabbat in the Hebrew Shiur, you'll see that she is a boss, a real normal person. And he's very, very poor and very non-intelligent person. Okay, so, and even though it's written, he is Manoach, and she doesn't have a name, she's just Eshet Manoach. So Baruch Hashem, after being suspicious for all the time and asking the Kadosh Baruch Hu to talk to me, not to my wife, he's going after his wife, and he's Amaretz. Very, the gap between Chazal to the Pshat HaKatuv is very big. Okay? And then the Malach comes and tells him exactly what to do with a baby to be born. Okay, and he asks him for his name. He doesn't say, he says Peli. And then Manoach brings a certain korban to the Malach, and then he goes away. Okay, and the end, ותלד האישה בן, אישה is giving a birth to a boy, ותקרא את שמו שמשון, ויגדל הנער ויברכהו השם, ותחל רוח השם לפעמו, so it's like a פעמון, a ring, okay? רוח הקודש gets in his head and shaking his head, בין צורעה ובין אשתאול. So if you go, where is צורעה and אשתאול? We know that we have the places on Kvish, road number 38, on the way to Bet Shemesh. That's where Machane Dan was. You remember that few prakim afterwards, we have the ending parashot of Pesel Micha and Pilagish Bagivah of Sefer Shoftim. And then in Pesel Micha, we find that Bnei Dan, they don't have enough Nachala. And therefore, they are told to go northern in order to search for a place to conquer and to widen their Nachala. And therefore they go and they pass Micha's house, they steal his pesel, they take the nar, whatever, and at the end of the day they come to the north, next to Lebanon, next to Metula, and we know from the map of Eretz Israel that they were scattered around two places. One is Dan, as we know, Gush Dan, which is actually not Tel Aviv, but closer to Bet Shemesh, okay, a little bit inner, Sha'alabim, Latrun, all these places. That's the Nachala of Dan. And on the other hand, they have Nachala in the north. Therefore, if you go to Kriyat Shmona, you have Kibbutz Dan, you have Tel Dan River, because that's a part of Nachalat Dan. Okay, so what I wanted to discuss now is not the gap between Chazal and between the Mikra, and not why, just to try to answer why in this specific place we find such a strong wife. Okay, no, I'm not talking about the difference between what Chazal said and between what the Mikra says, but we see that the mother of Shimshon, Eshet Manoach, was very practical. She understood immediately. She knew what to handle with a malach. She comes to her husband. She tells him. She understands everything, and we have to understand why. Here we find such a strong woman. We don't find so many strong women in the Tanakh. We find Sarah, and she prefers to stay in the tent, ba'oel, ine ba'oel. We find Rachel, okay? And sometimes we find a little bit Miriam, we find Eshet Manoach. So I want to discuss Eshet Manoach, and I will use things that I've heard from Rav Yaakov Maidan in the past. He had 4 explanations. I'll discuss just 3 because we won't have time for all of that. So maybe once we'll do the 4th one. Okay, so why do we have be'emet weak wives, weak women in the Tanakh? It's not just, we're used to think that it's because the difference between men and women in the past, anytime that people talk about equation and shivyon and so on, I tell about Switzerland, that we know that till 1964, okay, not so many years ago, 60 years ago, women didn't have couldn't vote in Swiss, okay? And I'm not going further, but 200 years ago, women didn't know how to write. They didn't have anything, and that's why that explains a lot of the things in the Torah. Let's say ones, that we cannot understand nowadays, that the raper will marry the wife that he has raped. But if we understand that a girl in the Tanakh time couldn't know anything, she didn't know how to read, she didn't know what to do, and since she was raped, she couldn't find a job. So if you marry her and you give her all the chiyuvim between husband and wife, there she has a defense. So that's an understanding of the Torah time, the Torah location in the society, and therefore we find weak women. But usually we find in all the Tanakh a difference between the husband and the wife in the years. Therefore, we know from the Resh Lakish in Masechet Gitin, Daf Yomi, few days, that Resh Lakish says that there is a fear that Adam might love his bat achoto, his daughter of his sister, and he would like to marry her or to betray with her and to defend her. And then several things are written. We know from all Shir Hashirim that we have the dod and the raya, and the dod is not just a kinui, to a nickname to the husband, and she is a raya. No, the dod is a dod, the uncle, because he is 1 generation at least older than hers. I'll give you several examples. Yitzchak and Rivka, okay? So Yitzchak and Rivka, how old is Rivka in the marriage? We know that the Torah explicitly say about Yitzchak that he was 40 years, okay? How old is she? So we know the famous Midrashim that says that she was born after the Kehilat. That's why there is a linkage at the end of Parshat Vayera. It's written that Inei Yalda Milka Gam Hi Banim Lenachor Achicha, and Rivka is born. So she is 3 because Yitzchak is 37 at the Akedah, so she's 3 at the marriage. But even if I don't take this Midrashim and I take Tosfot's attitude, Tosfot says by marriage she was 14. Okay, so he's 40. She is 1/4, and there is a generation between them, 26 years, and that makes that she is like his daughter. Let's see Yaakov and Rachel. We know Yaakov that he stood in front of Paro. It's written explicitly in Sefer Bereshit at the age of 130, and we know that Yosef was 39 by then, meaning to say that Yosef was born when Yaakov was 91. But according to the Pshat, Yaakov was, but when he came to Lavan, he was 77. So how can you bridge the gap? So we know the Gemara in Megillah, Rashi brings it that he states 14 years by Shem Va'ever in order to bridge the gap. But in any case, between Yaakov and his wife, there is at least one generation, okay? First of all, because Yaakov's mother is Rivka, her brother is Betuel, and his cousin, or Yaakov's cousin, is Lavan. And Rachel and Leah are a generation below, okay? They are what you call in English once removed, a cousin once removed, between second cousin and first cousin, okay? We call it in Hebrew ben dod v'chetzi. Their father, which is Lavan, is Yaakov's cousin, meaning to say that they're much, much younger than him. That explains beautifully a nice midrash that we find in Chazal. The midrash brings on one of the haftarot 3 stages between the love of a husband and his wife. The midrash says that batchila, at the beginning, kor'a biti. He calls his wife my daughter. I don't know any husband that will call his wife his daughter, and she would like it nowadays, because we don't find it just in Hollywood. We find that 80 years person gets married with 35. Okay, but in the normal world it doesn't happen. That's why she doesn't want to hear that she is your daughter. But sometimes in Chazal's time, in the Tanach's time, you are used to call your wife a daughter because she's like your baby. Okay, she's like your daughter. Therefore, the Midrash says, "Batchila kor'a biti, lo zaz mechabeva kor'a achoti." So after a while, he likes her so much, so he calls her my sister. Lo zaz mechabeva kor'a ishti. Okay. So, or imi, according to the Midrash. Okay, so at the end of the day, he calls her my mother. Okay, but what does it mean? So Rav Meidan explains, think about Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech had 1,000 wives, okay, 1,000 nashim. Shlomo HaMelech was very young. He was between the age of 25 and 30. He died actually very young, 52 according to Chazal. He had Armon, or palace, full of girls, but they all were about 14. So he was the head of the school, and there were students, pupils in his school. So he felt like they're all his daughters. And Chazal said that he knew that there is the isur of a melech to marry a lot of nashim, and he said, "Ani arbe velo echta." Why did he think that he won't sin? Because when you are a manager of a school, if you are a normal person, so you don't feel that you love all the students that you have. You feel like their father. You feel like responsibility on them. You cannot imagine yourself being older in 20, 30 years. Then you'll be 50. They'll be 40. And then the difference won't be so big, because the difference between 14 and 30 is much bigger and wider than the difference between 35 and 50. Because if you marry at the age of 50 or 35 years old, it's mamash like similarity. You can call her my sister. You don't call her my daughter anymore. But at the age of 25, 30, when you marry out a youngster, so then you feel like she's your daughter. And that's because of all of this. We have all over the Tanakh the gap of a generation between the husband and the wife. So not only that the wives didn't know Kro Uchtov, they weren't intelligent, okay, they weren't in university, etc. That's for sure. But more than that, they were younger, much younger than the husband, so they were afraid of talking next to him. And according to Rav Meidan, the problem with Eshet Manoach, that she was older. She wasn't at his age, and therefore she dared talking. Okay, she was very similar to his age, and that was the exception by Eshet Manoch. That's one explanation, and I think it's true. The second explanation, and that's very Rav Meidan typical, listen to it, it's very nice. We have, if you look at the Perek, so you have the location where it is, Ben Tzorah uven Eshtaol, and at the beginning of the Perek, Vayhi ish echad mitzorah. Okay? So if I'll ask you, where is Tzorah, you tell me next to Bet Shemesh, and it's from Nachalat Dan. Okay? But it's not what's written here. The Torah writes that the man מממשפחת הדני. Okay? The man is from Shevet Dan. But Tzorah, the Torah doesn't write it. The Tanakh doesn't write where it is from. And if you look at Shoftim Perek Aleph, Pasuk Lamed Aleph, let's skip for 1 second there. We have in Shoftim, at the beginning of Shoftim, we have all the places. Okay. וילחצו האמורי את בני דן ההרה, כי לא נתנו לרדת לעמק. ויואל האמורי לשבת בהר חרס באילון ובשעלבים, ותכבד יד בת יוסף ויהיו למס. So if you know, if you go to Tzorah on Kvish 38, you know that Bet Shemesh is a Ha'ara. Bet Shemesh and Sha'alabim, they are all hills, okay? Minzar Shatkanim, etc. If you look to your right, when you drive from Yerushalayim to Bet Shemesh, so to your right you have all the Ikea and Tzorah, whatever, and then all the area to the right is flat. You don't have hills, okay? And that's exactly what's written here. The Emori didn't let Bnei Dan laredet la'emek. Okay, so the Emori kept Bnei Dan from conquering the valley. Therefore, Rav Meidan makes hochacha that Shevet Dan was sitting in Sha'alabim, in the, next to Latrun or in the fields there, but couldn't get into Tzorah. And Tzorah was Nachalat Yehuda, not Nachalat Dan. Okay? So what we have till now is that the edge, the gvul, the border between Shevet Dan and Shevet Yehuda is on that place of Tzorah. Tzorah is a gvul, the border. It's a part of Nachalat Yehuda, but it's next to Shevet Dan. And another fact that we know, that Shevet Dan doesn't sit just there. He sits narrowly because of the pressure from the other side, from the Emori. Okay. If you look in Perek Yudchet, in Pesel Micha, we won't do it now. So as you saw, as we mentioned, you saw that they don't have enough place to live. Okay? And according to all of these, Rav Meidan thinks that the whole settlement of Shevet Dan in Tzorah was like a Machane Plitim, like Shuafat, or like, how do you call it, Bethlehem or Daihaisha, or all these camps of refugees, okay? The Adonim, the masters of the place, were Shevet Yehuda. The people who were around were Shevet Dan. They didn't have a Nachala, they didn't have a constant, there was Shevet Katan, they didn't have power enough, and they couldn't conquer, so they sat many years in the Ma'abarot, let's call it, next to Shevet Yehuda. What happens if you live like this? Think of all the Ma'abarot that were at the beginning of Medinat Israel. So they don't have money. They don't have, they have to work because they have to start their lives in the new place, Eretz Israel. So they work, they clean your house, they come to do avodot, low works. And therefore, another fact that I have to mention, we know from Sefer Divrei Hayamim and from the Gemara Baba Batra Tzadik Aleph what was the name of Eshet Manoach. The Torah, the Tanakh doesn't mention the name of Eshet Manoach, but she was called Slalfonit. Okay, that's what the Gemara says. Slalfonit. That's what was their name. If you look at Divrei Hayamim, you'll see that Achotam Hatzlalfoni, meaning to say that Tzlalfoni was from Shevet Yehuda. And therefore, because the Tanakh mentioned explicitly, Vayhi ish echad mishevet Hadani, and the Tzlalfoni, his wife, we know from Divrei Hayamim that she was from Shevet Yehuda. And based on what I said, that Shevet Yehuda and Shevet Dan were very close, Shevet Yehuda said calmly, where Shevet Dan had the pressure from one side from the Moiri and from the other side of Shevet Yehuda. So it's mamash like the story of the suburbs, like what you know, Dr. Doolittle and the seller of the flour in Bernard show, that it's a love between a master, Adon, from Shevet Yehuda, and a small girl that came to clean his house, that's Tzlalfonit. Okay, from Shevet, Adon from Shevet, we have one, the Manoach from Shevet Dan, and she comes to clean at his house, okay, but sorry. He comes to clean at her house. He from Shevet Dan comes to one of the rich families of Shevet Yehuda, and the daughter falls in love with a cleaner which is from Shevet Dan. Actually, nowadays we have cleaners boys. I believe that in the Tanakh, cleaners were just girls. So don't say a cleaner, say a gardener, say a builder, say poel binyan, whatever you want. Manoach works by Mishpachat Yehuda, by the masters, the rich people in the area. He is just like a slave. And he falls in love with one of the family of Shevet Yehuda. What's called with this? We know that sometimes, like in the rain in Spain, we have a marriage between the poor daughter and the rich husband, which is very learned and so on. But we have a very strong wife, because she comes from the elites. She comes from Shevet Yehuda, and he is just a slave or a worker or a poor worker from Shevet Dan. So just because of the circumstances that Shevet Dan didn't have nachala, a set nachala, and was just working by the hosting tribe Yehuda, that was the intermarriage of the tribes. We know that by then, usually we didn't have intermarriage. Most of the tribes got married just between themselves. And that was a charik, that was an exception. And that, according to Rav Meidan, the second option is because of, it was an exception. He was very poor, slave, non-intelligent person, and she came from a wealthy family, and she was from Shevet Yehuda. That's what made the gap, and she was so learned, and he wasn't so well. So according to the first explanation, usually in the Tanakh, we have a very big gap at the age between the husband and his wife. Here it was an exception. According to the second explanation, because Sorah was a Machane Plitim, and the husband worked by the rich families of Shevet Yehuda, the love, the marriage of the father and mother of Shimshon came, and Shimshon grew up in an interesting family. The father wasn't learned at all. The mother was very, very intelligent. Let's go on with the third explanation, which is very, very noach, and then we'll finish. We know that in the Tanakh we have a gvir, a baal, a husband, with several wives. Okay, Til Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershon, 1,000 years ago, it was permitted to marry several wives. Okay. And some of them were for beauty, not for giving birth, not for kids. And some of them wanted to give birth, but they couldn't. And if you see the discussion between Yaakov and Rachel, Rachel comes to Yaakov בתביעה with the demand and says, הבה לי בנים ואימיים מתה אנוכי. And then Yaakov answers, very, תחת אלוקים אני אשר מנע ממך פרי בטן. And Chazal criticizes him and says, וככה עונים את המועקות, how do you answer your wife? And we have the same thing with Hannah and Elkanah. Elkanah is a very strong person. We see that he comes, he goes to Aliyah LaRegel, and according to Chazal, he organizes a lot of people in order to go to the Mishkan in Shiloh. But if you look at the beginning of Sefer Shmuel, the Haftarah that we read on Rosh Hashanah, so you just see his wife Hannah, not him, even though he was much stronger than his wife. According to the Perek focuses on the distress, on the problem, on the being without kids, on Hannah. And we'll know that the Perek discusses Hannah, discusses her tefillah. We know all the halachot that in Masechet Brachot we learn from tefillat Hannah. Why don't we learn it from Elkanah? Not because Elkanah was weaker than her and she was such a strong wife. No, because the zoom in of the camera is just on her because she has a problem. He doesn't have any problem. He has other wife. He has Pnina with 10 kids according to Chazal. He doesn't care. Yaakov doesn't have any problem. He has a lot of tribes from many wives, but the only problem is with his wife Rachel. Therefore, the Kotov focuses on Rachel. So according to this explanation, it's not a matter not on a social culture of usually a big gap between the husband and his wife, and not because of the an exceptional occasion in which his father and mother were from different tribes, and his father was from the weak tribes of Dan, and his mother was from the wealthy tribe of Yehuda. According to the third explanation, it's just a matter of focusing, and Manoach maybe had different wives. We don't know anything about him, so he didn't care about the kid. And Vishto akara velo yalada, because just his wife was a weak person. Therefore, does the Kotov focus on her and not on him? And as we know that the Torah wants to focus on the tragedy, on the Yeshua from the tragedy, that if you daven or if you are weak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu answers you and helps you. So therefore, we can understand the wife of Manoach and the birth of Shimshon, not like משהו extraordinary. No, it was very ordinary marriage, and it's just a matter of the wife that doesn't have kids when the husband has many from other wives and he doesn't care. And therefore, the focus of the pasuk is on Manoach's wife. Why does the pasuk write Manoach's wife and not it doesn't call her Tzlalfoni and calls him Tzlalfoni's husband? That's I'll keep for Shabbat. But we try to answer in 3 options what's the difference and what's what happens here that never happens usually in other places. So again, next week, Tuesday, 2 weeks from today, there is no shiur, and 3 weeks from today, we'll do it on Wednesday. We'll publish it and I'll send you in the WhatsApp group as well. So have Chag Sameach in the meantime, and Shabbat Shalom. See you there.
תודה רבה. Very nice.
תודה.